Hello, my friends, hello, and welcome once again to stately Vaughan Manor. And it's Wednesday. That means it's... What? It's, it's not Wednesday. So it's not the day where I do my... No? It's not Epic Comic Book Wednesday today. You know what, though? Let's do a comic book video anyway. Yes, we're going to do a comic book video anyway. You know, we've been little hit and miss with our comic book videos for the last few weeks, thanks to weather and other shenanigans that have been happening. So why not give the 5% of my viewers who like comic book videos something extra? It's the video no one's been asking about. My top 10 favorite comic book artists. Yeah, this is it. This is my top 10 favorite comic book artists of all time. Love comic books. Love comic book artists and art. So yeah, who are my favorites? Everybody's just dying to know. So now, this is a top 10 list going 10 to 1 like these lists do. From my least favorite to my most favorite. Now, these are not who I think are the best comic book artists of all time. This is a subjective thing. So I'm not claiming these are the best comic book artists of all time, although number 1 is the best comic book artist of all time. But this is not a list of the best comic book artists of all time. It's just my list of my favorite comic book artists of all time. And they have drawn my favorite comic books ever. So let's talk about them. Let's talk about these fantastic comic book artists, beginning with number 10, Johnny Craig. Johnny Craig from EC Comics, EC Comic Books. EC was the greatest comic book company of all time back in the 1950s. And Johnny Craig was my favorite artist from EC Comics. I will not claim he was the best because, you know, Wally Wood worked at EC Comics at the time, but Johnny Craig was my favorite. There's just something about his style which was just so cool with the way he drew characters and the horrific situations they were in. They were always sweating and tense, and he just had a tremendous sense of atmosphere in his artwork. Just great. I love Johnny Craig. Loved his work. His work was, well, he did work for all the EC Comics, but it was featured in Vault of Horror. Vault of Horror was kind of his EC comic book. Just a great artist. Now, after EC Comics folded due to some tragic events that Roger and I will cover in a future video, Johnny Craig was still around. He did some other work, and he did show up in Marvel Comics on Iron Man. He did draw Iron Man for a bit, and he inked a lot of issues of Iron Man. So he was still around. But, of course, it's his work on EC Comics, which is legendary and will be around forever because those comics are very important in the history of comic books. So Johnny Craig, love Johnny Craig. So he's number 10. Let's go to number 9. And number 9 was one of my very favorite comic book artists from when I was a kid, and he's still one of my favorite comic book artists of all time. Mike Pleg, who drew a lot of non-superhero stuff. He could not, I don't think Mike Pleg could draw a superhero comic convincingly, but he was great on Marvel's horror comics and some other comics that they did. His greatest work was probably on Werewolf by Night, which when I was a little kid was one of my favorite comics of all time. It probably was my favorite when I was a kid. I loved Werewolf by Night, man. That was a great comic. And the Mike Pleg issues of Werewolf by Night, they had all been done and were out by the time I was reading comic books. So I was getting Werewolf by Night as back issues. I was getting all of his stuff as back issues. He also did Monster of Frankenstein. He did a lot of stuff. Werewolf by Night was probably his best. He's famous also for co-creating Ghost Rider, the newer version of Ghost Rider on the motorcycle. But my favorite work from him was from Planet of the Apes magazine, the black and white Planet of the Apes magazine that Marvel Comics did. Superb. It was superb. Loved it. Love Mike Pleg and his work. Hopefully Marvel will reprint some of that. His work was reprinted, I think the last time it was reprinted, the Planet of the Apes stuff, was in the 4 volumes archive editions. But now Marvel has the license again because they're coming out with a different Planet of the Apes comic book omnibus soon. So hopefully they'll get around to reprinting Mike Pleg stuff because it was just dynamite. Okay, number 8. Number 8 was Marie Severn. Marie Severn. Fantastic, fantastic comic book artist who just did fantastically. I say fantastic a lot. I know. She did incredible work. I'll just use incredible instead of fantastic. And she did incredible work. Did a lot of work on Kull. She did some work on the Kull comic book based on Robert E. Howard's King Kull. She also worked on the Hulk. I think some of her best work, some of my favorite work from her, was the work she did on Doctor Strange. She did just some awesome issues of Doctor Strange. She has just the coolest style. Her work just has a great look. Love Marie Severn. And yeah, Doctor Strange was probably my favorite, but anything she drew was amazing. And yeah, people should talk about her work more often than they do, I think. Anyway, that was number 8. Let's go to number 7. Gene Colan. Gene Colan. If you read comic books in the 1970s, you would recognize Gene Colan's work instantly. I mean, his work was so distinctive and beautiful. It was kind of surreal and stylized, and yet the human beings in his work looked like actual people. You know, they were distinctive human beings. An incredible artist. And he had a famous run on Daredevil. He worked on Captain America, worked on a lot of stuff, a ton of stuff actually, but it was his work on Tomb of Dracula, which is just legendary. He drew every issue of the comic book, every regular issue of the comic book, Tomb of Dracula. It was his masterpiece. It was his masterpiece, and it was an accomplishment that, you know, you can't. It was kind of unique how he did every issue of that, and they were all brilliant from his first issue to the last. Incredible artists. So that was Gene Colan. Number 6, Mike Mignola. Mike Mignola, one of the few who are actually still alive. Him and Mike Pleg are still alive. Mike Mignola is still around, and of course he is famous for Hellboy. He did a lot of other stuff. He actually kind of started off as a superhero artist, which seems odd now if you see some of his horror work that he did later. I do think Hellboy is his greatest work. It is a comic book masterpiece, Hellboy. Brilliant comic. It's wonderful. I like the first couple Hellboy movies, but they don't touch the comic book work. The comic book work's amazing. We have to talk about Hellboy some more on Epic Comic Book Wednesday, maybe very, very soon. But yeah, Hellboy, man. Mike Mignola, fantastic. Another artist with a style so distinctive, he's instantly recognizable. Even though a lot of people have imitated him, he is completely unique. He's amazing. Mike Mignola. Okay, that's number 6. Number 5, Steve Ditko. Steve Ditko. Now I'm mostly thinking of early Steve Ditko. Steve Ditko is an artist whose quality went down later on in his later years. His early stuff was great though. His early Spider-Man work, in particular, his work with Stan Lee on Spider-Man, those early Spider-Man issues are some of the greatest comic books that have ever been done. They're amazing. And he just had such a quirky, distinctive style of his own. Everything was really heroic and yet claustrophobic at the same time. It was a very interesting art style. And his early Spider-Man issues were great, but also the stuff that he did in Marvel's earlier horror and suspense type comic books that came out before Spider-Man, all of that stuff was dynamite as well. You should check all that stuff out. There are a couple really good omnibuses out right now with that stuff in it. And he was just incredible. I have to mention Steve Ditko just because that early Steve Ditko, that was fantastic. And I kind of liked those ROM issues too. And he was good on Indiana Jones, I have to say. I liked him on Indiana Jones. I like Steve Ditko. So there you go. Number 4, Joe Kubert. Joe Kubert. Now this guy was amazing. Fantastic. There's that word again. Incredible. He was an incredible artist. Brilliant. His work on Tarzan in particular, it was his Tarzan that I just loved as a kid. I first came across his work actually in a kind of like small digest size comic book that reprinted some of his Tarzan work, and then I went out and found some of his older Tarzan and bought it. Now I have it all. His work with the most impact on me, however, though, is probably Sergeant Rock. He did other stuff, Hawkman famously, but his work on Sergeant Rock, the greatest war comic book ever, it was amazing. DC Comics, reprint that stuff in a nice omnibus. Can you do that for me, please, DC Comics? DC Comics, they listened to me, then they're doing a Silver Age Superman omnibus coming out this December, apparently. I was shocked. So maybe they're watching our channel. If you are watching, Sergeant Rock needs an omnibus. Anyway, Joe Kubert, he was amazing. Incredible stuff. So Joe Kubert, he's great. He was number 4. Moving on to number 3, Gil Kane. Gil Kane, man, he drew everything. And he drew everything well. I mean, he drew everything great, except for that one issue of Blue Devil that kind of sucked. But you know what? You were in a rush. I understand, Gil Kane. Anyway, otherwise, other than that one issue of Blue Devil, he drew everything fantastic. He was great on Conan. He did Superman. He did Spider-Man. Brilliant Spider-Man issues. He literally worked on every character. First character he really became famous on was Green Lantern. He was the original Silver Age Green Lantern artist. And if you read that run, if you're lucky enough to have the first 2 Silver Age Green Lantern omnibuses, you can just really watch the development of his style and just how he just got better and better over time. Probably my favorite work of Gil Kane was actually the first couple issues. I can't remember how long he did it, but his first few issues at least of the John Carter of Mars series from Marvel, he was the perfect artist for that series. I wish he had stayed on it. The first issue of John Carter of Mars with Gil Kane on the art is a comic book masterpiece. It's a masterpiece. Love Gil Kane. He was great on everything except for that one issue of Blue Devil. Anyway, number 2, John Buscemi. Big John Buscemi. Now, Big John Buscemi, another artist who worked on so much. He was on the Avengers. He did everything. It seemed like John Buscemi did. Some of his highlights, Thor, you have to mention John Buscemi on Thor. He was great on Thor. But of course, the thing I'm thinking most of is his greatest work, and that was on Conan the Barbarian. He did artwork for the color comic book Conan the Barbarian, and he also worked on the black and white magazine Savage Sword of Conan. His work on Conan was amazing. His version of Robert E. Howard's Conan was brilliant. And to this day, when I read Conan, when I read Robert E. Howard's Conan, in my mind, I'm picturing the version that John Buscemi did. Because for me, John Buscemi's Conan is Conan. All my life, since I've been reading Conan, and when I started reading Conan, John Buscemi was drawing it. All my life, he's been my favorite Conan artist. He's been the best. But he also did so much else. And he was great on everything. John Buscemi, amazing. So number 1 is going to surprise absolutely nobody. Nobody will be surprised by number 1. My favorite comic book artist, and probably the most important comic book artist who ever lived, Jack Kirby, man. Jack Kirby. Has to be Jack Kirby, right? I mean, without him, where would Marvel Universe be? It probably wouldn't be. The Marvel Universe probably wouldn't be around without Jack Kirby. His stuff, along with writer Stan Lee, I mean, foundational stuff, right? He did the first issue of the Fantastic Four, which, you know, it founded the Marvel Universe. And before that, he co-created Captain America. And he was great on Captain America. He co-created the Hulk. I mean, Marvel's version of Thor. And he was great on all of that stuff. I mean, my favorite work from Jack Kirby is his work on the Fantastic Four. But, I mean, I like almost everything that he did. Almost everything. But almost everything that he did, I really loved. I mean, he couldn't write. I mean, he wrote some comic books, and it was kind of like, really? But his artwork, brilliant. And he just got better over time, it seemed like. If you compared some of his earlier artwork to when he was in his prime, you know, in the late 60s and into the 70s, I mean, as an artist, he was just incredible. Such great work. Jack Kirby has to be number 1. I mean, and if I were to say the greatest comic book artist of all time, I would say Jack Kirby. It would have to be. Okay, I'll shut up now. That's all I have to say for today. Until tomorrow when I talk more about comic books. Okay, guys, I will catch you next time.